about that time. So I want to welcome you. I know things are a touch different this week. We don't have our resident comedian Donna Watts here this week. She had already known she was going to be away today. That's right, that crowd has really dropped because of that. And then also Steve here, which really doesn't matter too much. Just kidding. Sorry, I'm sure Steve will be watching along. But as far as I know, he's doing okay. I know a number of you probably heard that he tested positive for COVID late last week. And so we've kept a close eye on who all has been around Steve, which a number of y'all went to the MACU trip. And then, of course, he was visiting other people as well. We know that Connie has it. But other than that, I don't think we've seen or heard of any other cases of it. So, but be praying for them. And so today, I have some thoughts on how we can kind of get into the lesson and have some fun together as well. But I'd rather us start with this song. I love this song, and we're going to see if we can hit the notes even when they get high, okay? So Yolanda's going to lead us, but we're going to need everybody to sing along, please.
This is one of my favorite old ones, too. It's got, well, it's not, unless you're an alto.
Or you're a dude.
Or dude, yeah. But the poetry in this song is just beautiful, so I'm just glad that this is the one he picked up to do.
I do the octave below, so we'll get somewhere in there. So, of course, you got some really good King James dialect in this song, and definitely gives it a poetic ring to it, and some fairly obscure references to Scripture. So the Ebenezer is one of those that you guys have probably sang for a while and thought to yourself, I wonder who that is. Is that the guy from Christmas Story? Or what? And it's actually a formal Old Testament name for a rock, I believe. Yolanda was looking into it a little bit, and we were both trying to talk about, okay, what was that about again? And I remember, without trying to look back into some of the notes on it, that it's considered a stone of remembrance, right? So it's something that you set up as a mark of some event that would happen between you and God. And then there's a specific reference to that. And who was it that you said, Yolanda? Was it Samuel that used that specific name, the Ebenezer, for that? So just a little teaser, maybe something you can study and figure out and find out more about so that the next time you want to raise your Ebenezer, you know what that's about.
Woo!
You know, so.
Didn't know I had an Ebenezer.
Yeah, that's right. Sounds like a family member that passed out and you're trying to bring him back up again or something. I don't know. Or feta. Have you guys heard that word before? It's not cheese. That's feta. Feta. You guys know what that is?
No.
A fetter is an old term for a chain. Let thy grace, like a chain, bind my wandering heart to thee. So pretty imagery there in the song. But yeah, some fairly old terms that have been used through the years for that particular song. Speaking of years, I want to do a little game with you. And so, you know, Steve does the trivia, and then of course Donna does the fun jokes and things, and I can't do both of those really well, so I had to pick one to do fairly okay. So we're going to do some trivia, but we're going to combine it with an age-old game you guys have all probably played at least once or twice in your life, and it's probably been decades since you played this game. It's called Hangman. You guys remember that one?
Yes.
It has been decades.
So I'm going to, really? So you play it like every other week? Or
No, but I've played it.
It's
That's
been a
what
while.
Wheel of Fortune is. That's a form of...
Yeah, very true, very
Yeah,
true,
form
yeah.
of-
So this is, it's got that kind of vibe to it, but we're going to turn it and use it a little bit differently. Instead of letters, I'm going to be looking for numbers. And we're going to go by tables. We're going to compete by tables here. So you lonely two over there are just left with one another on this one. But my guess is some of this will be a little bit of guesswork, so we'll see who's actually the luckiest in the room. Unless you guys are.
Single-digit numbers?
What's that?
Single-digit numbers?
Well, these are going to be 3-digit numbers, and you're going to have to use a single digit to find to it. So it's like cracking the safe, if you will. You have to find the right number in the right place. Or not actually in the right place, you just got to pick the right number. So this makes it go a little bit quicker. So you have like, how many letters in English? 24, something like that?
26 letters in the
26
alphabet.
in the alphabet?
Yeah.
You learn something new every day. We've learned about Ebenezer's, how many letters in the alphabet.
And the feather goes around their ankles. just
Yes,
to
yes, that's right.
clear that.
So you have, but you only have 10 numbers to work with for your single digits, and one of those would be 0, if you'd like to use it. And I'm going to ask you a Bible trivia question. So if you know it offhand, then you can guess it immediately. You are not allowed to look up the answers to these, okay? So don't look on your phone or in your Bible for this one. You guys have heard the story of Enoch, right? He's the one that walked with God and then was no more. In other words, God just basically took him to heaven without actually going through the whole death process in the Old Testament. My question about Enoch is, how long was he on the earth? That's a number of years. It's a 3-digit number. And we're going to start with this table over here, since they had the clear disadvantage, or just 2 of them over there. So would you like to pick a number and see if it hits?
3 numbers for 1.
Just pick one number between 0 and 9. Or if you know the answer, you can try and guess the answer.
I don't know the answer.
I'll guess a number, but I don't really know.
All right, we'll see if it hits.
What's the question again?
How long was Enoch on the earth before he went to be in heaven with the Father?
8.
We have a head on the eye.
What did she
She
say?
said 8.
Hey.
Yes. So I don't do face and all that stuff. It is just head, body, arms, and legs. Okay. That's how we're going to do Hangman today. So the stakes are high. All right. So we'll come up to this front table here.
So is it over 100? I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, it's a 3-digit number.
That's what I
over
thought.
100. Yeah. Yeah, these are Old Testament folks, so you know they've been around for a while, most of them. So Enoch, how long was he on the earth?
My first thought was 300.
So what number would you like to guess? Or is that, do you want to make that your guess?
Well, I don't know. Anybody else want to guess?
5.
5? 5 years or 500?
5?
Part of the cycle.
5? Boop! We have 8 and we have 5, okay, so 8 and 5.
I guess.
Do we get one guess per table?
One guess per table, yep.
4, she says.
4.
Going with 4.
We have a number.
Ooh.
Good job with that.
Oh, so it was 400 and some. Okay. I'm getting
Getting it now, yes.
Okay.
Back here.
Jane said 6. And I think
6.
He's wrong.
All right, we're trying to find out or figure out how long Enoch walked the earth. So we're going by tables to try to guess it before the man gets hanged. So back over to this table.
Back to us.
Back to
2.
2.
Enoch.
I keep looking. It's like you'd think I'd remember the number by now, but 2. We're getting in trouble.
We only have 2 more guesses.
We're going to go back up here to the front.
Okay, who wants to guess now?
6.
6.
We said 6, but you didn't put it up there.
6 is up there.
You had already said 6?
We said 6 and we got hung with that.
Okay, so we'll give you another shot on that.
I'll change to 1.
How about
Let me
one?
see.
One.
How
One.
about 3?
What'd you want? 3? 3 is a number.
Oh, good.
Good job. Okay, in the middle?
9.
No.
Oh, no. No. Okay.
You got one more shot. See if you can.
4, 5, 6, 8, 1,
That makes sense.
7, 4, 0. 7.
Wah, wah. Oh, this guy obviously is not Enoch. It is 430. He was on the earth.
That was our next guess.
All right. Let's do one more. This is a little bit easier, and I think someone already knows the number. Does anybody know who the oldest man
Yes.
in the Bible is? Methuselah. Okay, how long was Methuselah on the earth? Start over here.
How many digits was
3 digits.
3. Oh, my.
How long did Methuselah live, the oldest man in the Bible?
I thought it was 937 years.
Would you like to pick a number, or do you want to make that your guess?
9.
You said 9?
Yeah.
All right, you got the first number right.
969, I know.
It's 969. Congrats on this table, winning all the prize, which is lots of claps.
I mean, who doesn't know how old Methuselah was?
I didn't know. I had to look it up. It's been a
Oh,
while.
I wouldn't have admitted that, Mr. Minister.
Well, it's fine. I'm okay with that.
And you should.
I hope that if I get to the pearly gates, that's not going to question me.
But I bet you know it now.
Didn't know Methuselah. Sorry, buddy.
That was an easier one.
Yeah, we should have started with that one and gone over to Enoch, but that's all right.
Oh, well.
That was fun. That was fun. Thanks for indulging me on that.
Okay, you think that was fun?
It's painful for y'all. I just like to watch people suffer. That's why I listen. Okay. All right. Let's get into where we are in the life of David. So in the book, it's chapter 22, and we only have a few more chapters left. I think maybe a couple more. Then after that, we're going to get into the life of Esther. And so that should be a good, it won't be as long of a study as David has been, but it will certainly be an interesting one, because you probably know the grand story of Esther, but some of the details are really great as well, so hopefully that'll be a good experience. But for today, we're going to be in 2 Samuel 16, and then also in chapter 19 for a little bit, and we'll have a couple of texts from Psalms that we'll be looking at too. We're going to talk about forgiveness. And so I hope you've seen that the study that we've had with David has been about more than just geographical and biographical facts. Like, this is more than just trivia that we're looking at. We wanted to actually be able to step into David's shoes, to emulate the qualities that he had to make him a man after God's own heart. So this is a character study, as is all of these that Swindoll has written in this series. just looking at the choices that these people make, who are famous in the Bible, with circumstances that some are more obscure than others, but in all of these circumstances, you can see there have been some tough choices that they've had to make over and over again. We put ourselves in those shoes and we think to ourselves, well, would we do the same thing? Will we make the same choices? Or will we make the same mistakes that they may have made? And so that's been a great experience, I think, for myself, just trying to stay humble with that too. So one of the qualities of David that he demonstrated really well, of all the ones that we've seen recently that he didn't demonstrate well, one that he did demonstrate well throughout his life was the ability to forgive. That's an aspect to his being a man after God's own heart. And it's probably one of the hardest things to develop if it's not something that comes naturally to you. For some people, it is more natural than other people to forgive. Sometimes something can happen in your life and it changes your ability to forgive because of the severity or whatever that you're dealing with there. So, what's that? Oh, no, that's funny. Yeah, Marie was talking to me recently about just a situation she's had to deal with forgiveness and stuff. And so here I am showing up at the next lesson, like talking about forgiveness. I'll be looking at you the whole time, like and leaning over the podium. I promise. This was not intentional. It was not.
I know.
I love how God does that kind of thing, though, where He's like, let me just turn the screw a little bit on us. But all of us can probably think of a thing or two, maybe even recently, where we've been like, yeah, I wish I'd have thought about this ahead of time. But still, here's some stuff that we want to do. When forgiving someone, here's 3 things that we oftentimes do that we shouldn't, okay? The first thing is forgiving conditionally. Forgiving conditionally. We want the person to meet some type of standard that we have for them before we are willing to forgive them. If you own up to your part of the problem, if you somehow admit that you're wrong in one way or another, and then say to me or demonstrate in some way that you are trying to improve on your side of the problem, then I'm ready to forgive. But that's not necessarily the pattern that we see God showing us, and also even in David's example as well. And then we forgive partially as well. Partially. P-A-R-T-I-A-L-L-Y. Partially. Where it's, I'll forgive you, but I'm still going to bring it back up a little bit later if something similar to it happens, and I never really put it aside. It's always there in my mind. I'm willing to forgive you as long as I'll never have to see you again. That's all. So that's a partial type of forgiveness. Then another one that we often do is delayed forgiveness. And that actually can be kind of a natural course of events. It's hard for us to forgive immediately. Sometimes it does take time for us to forgive, to get to a point emotionally where we can do that. But it is our nature to prefer the judgment seat over the mercy seat. In the Bible, you can see there's a couple different thrones that God talks about. One is the throne of judgment, the other one is the throne of mercy, or the mercy seat. We would prefer, the judgment seat sits more comfortably than the mercy one does oftentimes. But forgiveness isn't just about the other person, it's also about us and developing our own character. So it's worth the effort of learning the tendency, or developing the tendency to go after mercy over judgment. Because it's certainly something that has been demonstrated for us from our Creator. And there's a danger to trying to put ourselves in a position of judgment. There is a dramatic downward effect that can happen. You can have the offense, and then the offense will lead towards hatred. That's a blank. It could be hatred, and then that would lead to a grudge or bitterness, right? A grudge. And then that can lead towards even as far as acts of revenge. And that's when you're trying to somehow even the score with someone. in order to try to feel better, but you find yourself actually feeling worse, and that's the spiral that you find yourself in. It's not like you can go back to zero by doing these things, but we oftentimes emotionally can spiral into that. Offense to hatred, to grudge, to revenge. So the idea is to try to jump out of that spiral as soon as possible. So you want to do that even on the level of the offense. So if we don't deal with anger at the offense level on a daily basis, then we find ourselves quickly getting into trouble. We start to acclimate to the spiral, if you will.
So we don't let it fester.
Right. When you are upset or hurt by something or someone, and you let that kind of sit there for a while, it's like the frog in the kettle, and you kind of exist in this space of bitterness or anger, where it used to be uncomfortable for you, now it's a place of comfort for you. Like it becomes something that the judgment seat becomes more comfortable, you fall asleep in it, you know. And that can be a dangerous place to find yourself, because we don't really deserve to take that place in people's lives oftentimes. It's in Scripture where God talks about it. It's His to avenge. He's the one that's able to see truly right and wrong. So not putting ourselves in His position. So we're going to look at an example of complete forgiveness in David's life, and see if there's a pattern that we can follow with it. Now, if you remember where we left off, David's really never been in a lower place in his life. That's a blank lower. He's never really been worse off ever in his life. And he's had some bad times in his life. But this is the first time that David is as unpopular as he is. He's got friends. We talked last week about the friends who are there with him to try and support him through this time. But he has lost Absalom, and he's really torn up by that. You can see how he reacted to that when Absalom died. And so he's got that going on. He's basically lost the throne temporarily. And, you know, at this point in his life, it could even seem permanent to him that he had lost the throne. But we'll see he'll regain it soon. But at this point where we catch him, he's in a really bad spot. And so if you've been in situations like this in your life, you know your emotions can even take on another level. So things that weren't as bothersome to you or difficult to deal with can become more so when you're dealing with other just general stresses in life, or bad health, or any of those types of things that oftentimes cause us to get off of our equilibrium when it comes to reacting to situations. This is where David is. It's a good chance he wrote Psalm 40, 1 and 2 and verse 12 at this point in his life. It's a good description of what it would feel like to be in this point in life. Psalm 40, verse 1 and 2. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me, heard my cry, lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. Do not withhold your mercy from me, Lord. May your love and faithfulness always protect me. For troubles without number surround me, and my sins have overtaken me, and I cannot see. They are more than the hairs of my head, and my heart fails within me. Be pleased to save me, Lord. Come quickly, Lord, to help me. So last week we looked at the friends that surrounded David in this time. And now we're actually going to see a man who really was no friend to David. In fact, he was kind of a jerk to him. And so we're going to see how he reacts to this person as he encounters him in 2 Samuel 16, starting in verse 5. As King David approached Bahurim, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there. His name is Shimei, son of Jerah, and he cursed as he came out. He pelted David and all the king's officials with stones, though all the troops in the special guard were on David's right and left. As he cursed, Shimei said, get out, you murderer, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. The Lord has given the kingdom into the hands of your son Absalom, and you have come to ruin because you are a murderer. So this is a man who clearly has nursed this bitterness and this grudge in such a way. I mean, this has been years have gone by since the transition from Saul to David. And if you remember how the throne changed hands, it wasn't David that was shedding blood. It wasn't him that was the murderer in the situation. But this man has aimed all of his angst and bitterness towards this king who's now in a really bad place in his life, and he just doesn't seem to see any threat by throwing rocks at this man, even though he's surrounded by all of these special military guard who are his friends along the way. So this is how far bitterness is kind of like warped his sense of reality here. Now David is no longer actually on the throne. Shimei sneaks out of hiding and he tries to unleash on David. And he tells 3 lies in Shimei's. His statement has 3 lies in it. I mentioned one of them, but what are the 3 that you can see? One was that he murdered Saul. Right, he did do that. Another one is that David stole the throne from Saul. That wasn't true either. And also that the Lord gave Absalom the throne. That's not how it went down either. So it didn't matter, right? This is kind of a typical fake news situation where a person who's looking for a narrative will find it if it makes them feel better. And so that's where this man is. And so Shimei is just your basic reprobate, kicking David while he was down and out, just being a jerk to the guy, throwing rocks at him and his friends, calling him names. So one of David's friends has a good suggestion to David on what to do in the situation. 2 Samuel 6:9. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut off his head." That's a buddy, isn't it? This guy. He's like, hey, I'll take care of the situation right here, right now. Which, honestly, when you think about all that David's gone through and who this guy is and what he's saying to David, probably is slightly tempting, right? It's kind of a direct approach to the situation that sounds fairly appealing, I'm sure, if you're having a bad day. And so that can happen. We can have someone whispering in our ear for us to stand up for ourselves, or for even them to take that on themselves for us. And it's nice to feel loved by that friend who's murderous. But the bottom line is, your murderous friend doesn't need to be the one to enact any kind of justice on other people, because it makes you feel better, as tempting as it can be. So here's where David is. He's got this guy in his face, and now he's got a friend who's like, I can easily take care of this guy for you. What do you want me to do? And he's at a fork in the road where he's got to make a decision. And here's what he says. The king says to his friend, "What does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? If he's cursing because the Lord said to him, 'Curse David,' who can ask, 'Why do you do this?'" Interesting. These guys, the sons of Zeruiah, he knew they had a short fuse. They're related to Saul's clan. So very similar mindset. Short fuse, okay? So David refuses to retaliate, and he stays calm in the situation. There's your blank. So for him to be able to stay calm, and even he's not even trying to take revenge for himself. He's got the opportunity for someone else to take revenge for him. He could have stayed calm and said, yeah, go ahead and do it. But more than that, he stayed calm and said, there's probably more to this situation than we're able to see. Right? That's basically his explanation to Saul. It's an amazing example of self-control. Self-control will lead you towards having a soft heart but thick skin. And that's going to help you get through times when, whether you're being tested, this is what David's interpretation is. It's not that, well, this is an evil guy who's doing evil things. He's saying, perhaps God is behind this. And why would God be behind something like that, right? It seems like a bad thing that's going on for David. It's possible that God uses even these tough times in our life and difficult people that come into our life at the worst times as a test for us to rise to the occasion. Now, David is at a low point in his life, and this is very clearly a time where he could have continued going lower, but he didn't. And he recognizes that the Lord, that's a blank there, is aware of what's happening to him.
It was filled in.
Oh, it was already filled in. David recognizes that the Lord is aware of what's happening to him, and he leaves it at that. Right? I love that perspective. He's saying, God knows how I feel. God knows the injustice that's happened to me. Perhaps this man is a continuation of the situation I'm facing now, but God knows the situation, so let's trust Him and not ask, well, why do you do this? So this is a level of spiritual maturity and that example of a man after God's heart that we try to see if we can rise to that occasion as well. To be used by God in the ways that God used David, you have to think the way that David did in these times. You have to have this kind of thick skin and soft heart. So then you jump ahead in the story. This is where we jump into 2 Samuel 19. Some time has passed and a lot of things have happened in between here. We're just going to just skip right through. So Absalom's already been murdered. The people have turned back to David as their leader. So they're willing to bring him back on as king. And now is the day of coronation. So David's come from the lowest level where he lost so much, the kingdom, his son, respect, and now he's all the way back to the top. And that's how quickly things can change for someone, especially in God's will. Lowest level to the highest mountaintop. And here comes Shimei again. This guy, Shimei, yeah, that's a fun name for someone who gets on your nerves. Yeah,
It's
Mr.
ironic
Shimei.
because there's a word very close in Italian dialect that means the same thing, only in Italian they call it shimia.
Shimei.
Yeah,
Really?
they're-
What is that?
I could tell, like grandkids or kids were being goofy and not using their hat, I'd say, don't be a shimia.
Huh.
So it's
Interesting.
similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. If you see somebody named Shimei walking around, or Shimei, you're probably not in for a good encounter. So here he comes, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim, hurried down with the men of Judah to meet King David. With him were 1,000 Benjamites, along with Ziba, the steward of Saul's household, and his 15 sons and 20 servants. Remember Ziba?
15 young.
Ziba is connected to Mephibosheth. He was the guy that David asked, is there anyone in Saul's family whom I can respect in Jonathan's honor? And Ziba was the servant who said, there's this young, well actually I guess it wouldn't be young at the time, but there's this man, Mephibosheth, who's lame in both feet, so not sure if you really want to bring him in. He'd be kind of an eyesore for your kingdom. That was kind of the implication. And then when David installed Mephibosheth into his family, made Ziba the servant of Mephibosheth. So Ziba shows back around with this guy, Shimei, and all these people. They rushed to the Jordan where the king was. They crossed at the ford to take the king's household over and to do whatever he wished. When Shimei, son of Gera, crossed the Jordan, he fell prostrate before the king and said to him, may my lord not hold me guilty. Do not remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind. That's kind of strange. Like, you want the guy to forget it, but you're just reminding him of it, like right here in the situation. For I, your servant, know that I have sinned, but today I've come here as the first from the tribes of Joseph to come down and meet my lord the king. So this man, either out of fear or remorse, has come to David. Maybe more fear, I don't know, than remorse. But he's come to David and he says the hardest words in the English language, I have sinned.
Oh, of them, yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, that's similar. That could work too. I have sinned,
Mm.
which potentially, perhaps, rang a bell in David's mind. Those are words that he spoke himself, if you remember, when Nathan confronted him for the sin he had with Bathsheba. So it's interesting how it comes around in that way. You have now a man saying to David the very words he said in response to what he did against Bathsheba, Uriah, and God himself. And so maybe David thought about that. And forgiveness comes easier when we remember our own failures. My guess is David might have flashed back to that statement himself and thought, I better be careful here. Because if I'm not willing to accept this man's statement, his confession, after I've already been forgiven for my own example of saying this, then that's some hypocrisy and could put me in a bad spot before my Father, right? So before we look at how David responds, we want to put ourselves in Shimei's shoes real quick. We've all been there, 100% in the wrong, having to own up to something, which isn't easy at all. And he does, right? He goes to David and he faces him. Before David finds Shimei, Shimei finds David and he confesses the mistake that he made. Now, David could have responded in a lot of different ways. He could have responded in the anger that he suppressed earlier when he said to his friend, hold off, it's okay. Or he could actually have been totally indifferent to Shimei and said, you know what, you're just a commoner, and I'm king, and you don't bug me at all, which can oftentimes be even worse than responding in anger. Maybe you've encountered that yourself, where you've tried to apologize and the person has just dismissed you in that. And it's kind of like a controlled rage when someone is indifferent to you. And it can be very painful. You may have heard, I've heard this often, I believe it to be true, that the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference, it's apathy. And he could have responded that way. But this is how he actually responds in verse 21. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said, shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this? Curse the Lord's anointed. It's that good friend again. David replied, what does this have to do with you, sons of Zeruiah? What right do you have to interfere? Should anyone be put to death in Israel today? Don't I know that today I am king over Israel? So the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. And the king promised him on oath. All right, so this is another son of Zeruiah with a short fuse. And David's self-control wins over it like it did when Shimei was hurling rocks and cursing at him. Abishai, it's another son of Zeruiah. The other guy was, no, Shimei was, well, shoot, it's the same guy. Maybe I just saw. I don't know. So it could be two guys with the same guy. I don't know what I was thinking of. All right. So he's throwing rocks, hurls insults at him the first time. The second time he comes to him and he confesses. And both of those times, David is able to keep his head in the situation. How did he do it, you ask? I'd love to tell you. I got the answers from the book anyway. So here it is. Number one, David kept his vertical focus clear. What does that mean? That means his perspective of how God can be in this situation and the nature of his relationship with God in the midst of that circumstance. Right? So he immediately thinks about how God could be involved and how God could handle the situation himself. So he keeps that focus clear. Secondly, David was very much aware of his own failure. So those who have been forgiven of much, will forgive much. Right? Those who have been loved much will love much. It's a really bad paraphrase of what Jesus said at one point. The humbled forgiven make good forgivers. So David most likely understood the feelings that Shimei had and what he was going through, whether it be fear or remorse. I'm sure David felt a little of both before. So here's some advice from the things that we saw in this example of forgiveness. First of all, cultivate a thick layer of skin. God can help you with that. That's something to pray for. God, will you help me to not be as affected by this person, this situation, whatever. Help me to trust you when these difficult times arise. Will you give me thick skin for this, right? Help me to be more like Christ when he encountered these people who opposed him and less like a China doll in a situation. And then secondly, try to understand where the offender is coming from. Try to put yourself in their mind and think, what is causing them to behave in this way, where they are reacting either in fear or bitterness. And a lot of times you'll be able to rise above the emotion of the situation because you'll see that it really doesn't have as much to do with you that they're doing this as it does with them in the situation they're in or whatever struggle they're going through themselves. It takes a lot of grace, it takes a lot of insight, but it certainly helps you to see the situation clearly, or more clearly, than before.
Chris,
Yes.
sometimes I've come across a couple of things and you know, I've done what I could to, you know, make amends or whatever, and sometimes it's all you can do. You know, you can do what you can do, and then it's up to the other person. And then other times, you just sometimes have to agree to disagree.
Sure. Yeah. Forgiveness doesn't necessarily have to always lead to restoring the relationship to where it once was. That's a two-way street. You're only responsible for your side of it, your side of the street, right? And you do what you can, and like you said, you can't get absorbed into a situation where a person is refusing to react in a healthy way to you. So I think that's a good thought. You're not responsible for the other person, you're responsible for yourself, and God can help you in the way that you react to the situation. So this can help when you see that perspective of maybe seeing the little girl or the little boy in that person who seems to be full of themselves. It helps stop the chain reaction that anger can produce, which is what we talked about before, where you have the offense that leads towards the bitterness and the grudge, and sometimes even acting in revenge. Chain reaction. The guy who's yelled at work, and he goes home and yells at his wife, and then his wife yells at the kid, and the kid kicks the cat. Yeah. And the cat prowls around to bite something, you know? Who knew the boss at work would lead to a cat in a bad mood later in the day? That's kind of how it happens, right? Chain reaction. So recall times in your life when we needed forgiveness and apply that same emotion. Okay, so when you were in a place of needing forgiveness, those emotions that you felt will help you be able to deal with a person assuming that they've come to you asking for that forgiveness. So that's a way of staying authentic, keeping yourself out of hypocrisy, which is easy to slip into when you're in an angry mindset. And of course, verbalize forgiveness. Okay? A key part of forgiveness is that it is expressed, not just thought. So this isn't just an internal thing for you to stay healthy. It's also something for you to restore a person. So don't just think it, say it. And then when you are, it's a lot easier actually sometimes to think it than it is to sit down in front of this other person and tell them that you have forgiven them. But the typical natural response is to say, well, at least I don't want to kill him, so therefore I've forgiven him, right? That's kind of the way it is. It's like, well, at least I haven't done to you what I thought I'd like to do. I've kind of gotten myself into a better headspace, but I don't want to be around you anymore, and that's the mindset. Instead, let's make it our goal to actually verbalize, especially if they've apologized to us, that type of forgiveness. that we may be feeling towards them. Okay? Let me finish with this little story at the end of the chapter I thought was kind of interesting. It's about Rockefeller. It was written in a book, You Can Win with Love, by Dale Galloway. So this is a story from a book who pulled the story from another book. And it's about John D. Rockefeller, the man who built the great Standard Oil empire. Not surprisingly, Rockefeller was a man who demanded high performance from his company executives. Then one day, one of those executives made a $2 million mistake. Now, $2 million back then is a lot of money. Word of the man's enormous, not anymore, word of the man's enormous error quickly spread throughout the executive offices, and the other men began to make themselves scarce. Afraid of Rockefeller's reaction, they didn't even want to cross his path. One man didn't have any choice, however, since he had an appointment with the boss. So he straightened his shoulders and tightened his belt and walked into Rockefeller's office. As he approached the oil monarch's desk, Rockefeller looked up from the piece of paper upon which he was writing. I guess you've heard about the $2 million mistake a friend made, he said abruptly. Yes, the executive said, expecting Rockefeller to explode. Well, I've been sitting here listing all of our friend's good qualities on this sheet of paper, and I've discovered that in the past he has made us many more times the amount he lost for us today by his one mistake. His good points far outweigh this one human error. So I think we ought to forgive him, don't you? Whether it's a $2 million mistake or a one-sentence off-cuff comment, we need to respond with Christ-like grace, complete forgiveness. Like David, we need a soft heart, thick skin, vertical focus. We need awareness of our own failures and our own need for forgiveness. It's a good example of that. Reminded me of a time I was working at CarMax, and I had just been promoted to sales manager, which is a pretty cool job, no longer on commission. That was helpful. But they give you the keys to the store, and of course you're responsible to lock the place up and secure the alarm and all that stuff. And I was really good at that, followed all the orders and things. But I left the keys in the glove box of my car one night, which ended up being stolen as someone broke into my car that night. Within about a month of me being promoted, I had to go to the store manager and tell him, hey, you know all these $3 million worth of inventory here of cars out in this lot, they're all at risk right now because someone took these keys out of my car. So that was a tough thing to have to share, but my boss handled it well. He's a really good guy, and they kind of anticipated knuckleheads like me, so they make these locks in such a way that you can switch them out fairly easily, and so it was good. Had I tried to keep it to myself, it could have been much worse.
Did you hear about that man? He put the decimal point in the wrong place at the gas station, the manager, and the gas was going for 69 cents instead of $6.99.
Oh,
They
goodness.
fired him, and
heartbreaking.
he's trying to do a GoFundMe. He's trying to repay the owners $16,000.
Gracious.
Fired him for one decimal point.
Yeah, it's the worst time to be doing that kind of thing, I would imagine.
That is horrible.
But yeah, it's I'm sure word got around. He was like, why is it so busy out there? I don't understand why there's so many cars.